and a warm welcome back to Beyond the Norm. I am so delighted to have Gus this morning, Gus Grima, um, who I will let her introduce herself, but let's just say she has walked with me in these last 8 months or so during my longest transition from leaving my corporate life and into this new world that I am navigating, and has been just a light to me. So I'll allow Gus to introduce herself and just tell her story and who she is. So over to you, Gus. If you could introduce yourself, please.
Thank you, Norma. Thank you for inviting me and giving me this opportunity. So I just asked you earlier, like, how far back do I go? So I think I'm going to give a little, I'm going to go back. It's had me reflecting. So I recognize in myself, I'm now 52 years old, that all through my kind of young adulthood and teenage years, I was very much someone that was always looking for another way of doing something. So that meant wanting to break the rules, even though I wasn't particularly rebellious when I was younger, but never really just taking what anyone said as being the thing. There was something in me that was like, really? And so my young adulthood, my sort of early career life, should we say, was so non-linear, and there's so many times when I was like, why can't I just be like, other people that seem to have it sussed out or seem to be following a track and dedicating themselves to that. And I was not like that. And I would kind of enter into a role, a job, and then suddenly feel like, either there would be an external event to me that made me realize I just could not stay there, or it was my own health or, mental health, or just my feeling like it just wasn't for me. So there was a lot of jumping around from thing to thing to thing. Through much of my adult life, really, until well, it still continues, but into my 40s when I discovered human design. And so everything was non-linear. I just seemed to be jumping from this to that, and having lots of experiences. And through the experiences, figuring out what I liked and what I didn't like, what I wanted and what I didn't want. And that was in both actual jobs, but also the relationships, the friendships, and also it was teaching me about me, my capacity, my grit, my adaptability, like what I was capable of. And it was teaching me about change, because ultimately it always meant changing something and pivoting and going, actually, I don't like this direction, I'm going to go in another. But behind all of this, there was this chatter in my mind that was telling me, why are you like this? Why can't you just be like settled? Why can't you just have the one thing? Part of that was sort of almost like envy. I wish I could be like that. And part of that was coming from stories that are playing out, that you needed to just do the thing, see the thing through, stick with the thing, and that showed consistency versus flakiness. So there was a lot of stories around that. So I held a little bit of shame around my kind of potted career of, what I did. Ultimately, the first thing I did was do what my dad did, because that was what was expected of me. Got into advertising. Realized very soon that really wasn't for me, because I couldn't take the sometimes lack of integrity that I saw in that industry. And then I just moseyed my way through, basically responding to life, which of course, when I found out my design, I was like, oh, I was actually being, in my design for a lot of it, responding to things that showed up in my environment, whether that was people, experiences, projects, events, and moving with that until it felt like I wasn't enjoying it anymore. So I had kids in my late 30s, and that was a big transition and rebirth for me. And it had me look at things and myself in a whole new way. And it also made me realize that I was kind of slowly but surely, there were aspects of me that I'd been losing along the path of my life, where I hadn't really been showing up for myself or being honest with myself, or where I'd been compromising parts of me or keeping them kind of slightly under lock and key, not fully expressing myself. And so it all came to a head in my early 40s when I started to experience the start of some health issues. And I was a young mum to my youngest was pretty young at the time. He was under 3, and I started to experience things that I didn't feel good, like that was affecting my quality of life, my relationships, my relationship with my kids. And I remember going to the doctor, and which is unusual for me because I'm always looking for the alternative route, but I will go and see what they have to say, and then I'll take that information and do my own investigations as well. And he told me, well, you're probably going into perimenopause, so I can offer you an antidepressant. And I was like, what? That can't be right. 42, I had no concept that that's when that journey might start. And so I rubbished what he thought. I thought, well, I'm going to find a way. I'm going to find my way, which has often been my kind of line of thinking. I'm going to find a way of how to get myself better. And so that literally became a pivot point for me, where I soon after that realized that I really had to stop the corporate job that I was doing, and kind of strike out in a brand new direction that was really scary. Because my whole identity up till then had been very connected to the work that I did. And suddenly I was going to pull out of that and just try being a mother. That's it. Which I'd never even thought that, and so my whole identity and world shifted in a really kind of drastic way. So my 40s was an absolute explosion of discovery for me, like the best decade of my life so far. That pivot was the start of a big journey back to myself and remembering who I was. It was not without its dark nights. But through that process is how I came to human design I think I was 46 maybe when I found human design. Yeah.
Wow. Which is ironic because I came onto it at 45. So, actually, yeah, 45. I still have to remember I'm still 45. I'm not 46 yet.
I do that too. I'm like,
When you hear
how old am I really?
Yeah, yeah. It just after a certain age, you're like, what? Remind me. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Gus, for that, because I think that's the coherence and resonance for the listeners, that the something has to change in us dramatically for everything to change. And that can really, I suppose, start us on these journeys of, okay, what do I need now? Like, what's going to be a part of my, I suppose, kit and support? Which brings us to that, I suppose, big burning question: what is human design?
So let's see if I can do this justice, but I'll give you a little overview. So I see human design as a really fantastic tool that helps you understand yourself a lot better. But it's also an invitation and an opportunity to really see, perhaps with more accuracy or clarity, the patterns and stories that you've been carrying around with yourself, probably since you were a child, young teenager, young adult, that you thought were part of who you are, part of the identities of you, but actually they're not. And they are starting to, especially in your 40s, you realize, starting to block you and hold you back from where you actually want to go, but also from being your true nature. And so in the chart, we have what we call centers. And some of those centers are defined, colored in, and that's where we transmit and broadcast our unique essence, energy, gifts, genius from. And then we have white undefined centers where we are more like a sponge and we're absorbing energy from the field around us, people we're around, the environments we're in. So what I find is that in the white undefined centers, we're much more influenced. And those influences would have started when we were much younger. And we would have made adaptations when we were younger to cope with what we were influenced about, themes. And so those patterns can move into adulthood without us realizing and affect everything, the decisions we make in terms of our job and direction in life, but also the relationships that we're drawn to. And something about, I work mainly with women in their 40s, and there's something about that decade, which, I've there is a lot to it cosmologically, but also obviously from the inside out, our hormones are starting to change, but from the outside in, the cosmos is also, there's some big life cycles that happen in our 40s. And there's a cracking open that happens for a lot of women in their 40s, irrespective of whether you're a mother or not. A cracking open, because it is this kind of like, it's like a pressure point, like a valve that you've got to look at the stuff that perhaps you've been ignoring for the last 20, 30 years. And it comes up for you specifically to look at it and reckon with it and do any healing and processing that you need to do. And I think the more you resist that, the more you turn away, the louder it becomes, whether it be physical, emotional, mental, like environmental. It shows up. It's here for you, because ultimately the purpose is get back to being who you're meant to be. And maybe you've constructed a life so far that doesn't really support you to be who you are, and you've lost parts of yourself. So human design, coming back to it, for me is a great practical way of helping you unpack part of that for yourself. And I don't know if that's what you found for yourself.
Super. Oh, massively, massively. And I'm not, when you're speaking, I'm just thinking of so many outside of my clients, but friends, that the 40s has just been very uncomfortable.
Oh
But
yeah.
yet it's like a cleansing nearly of what's
Mm,
not no longer serving you. I say that as well. What I liked about human design always has been it's so inclusive of everything you've ever done until the point you discover it.
yeah.
Um, and that's being a systemic coach. That's what I liked. It's like it doesn't exclude anything. In fact, it includes everything. And what you said there is something that I've been saying for years to myself, but to others. And the volume will get turned up on something until it's so unpleasant. You don't want to see it, you can't. And that's I suppose, a sound, but even you don't want to see it, you don't want to hear it until you acknowledge it and go through it,
Mm, mm,
or allow it to pass through you,
yeah.
depending on why you see that energy. Um, I'll give, I suppose, my first experience with it was in Bali. I don't know if I ever told you this, Gus.
I don't think so.
Um, after my mother died, I was in Bali. I found myself in Bali. I was meant to go to Sri Lanka. Something awful happened in Sri Lanka a few days after I'd booked it, and I ended up in Bali. I was obviously meant to go to Bali and not Sri Lanka. Still haven't gone to Sri Lanka. It's on the cards, especially after India. But I landed in a home with two coaches. One was, I suppose, more akin to myself, a life coach, and the other was a human design coach. And he opened the book of human design on my last night and asked me like my details. I didn't probably have my exact birth time, but I had everything else. And he must have said that I was a projector, which is, Gus will share in a moment, the types. And he kept talking about my voice, my voice, my voice. And it meant nothing to me at the time. But there was something that went, oh yeah, that definitely sounds like me. But because my mother wasn't long after long dying, the last thing I was empowered by was my voice actually, and was struggling with my voice at that time. I lost a lot of confidence because I had stepped back from the workplace, didn't know who I was in relation to work, just like you, as you said. Um, but I remember thinking it was long before you take a photograph, a smartphone photograph of a page of a book. You just didn't think, you just heard something and you moved on. But I remember the book, it was like, I'm sure it was the book that you studied, like that really big, thick human design book. And I remember just being fascinated by it, but totally and utterly forgot about it.
Mm,
It was like, it was the first time I heard it. But I do remember thinking voice, voice, voice. Um, and it wasn't until I went to Joe Dispenza and met like a client in common that we have that said, "Oh yeah, my God, human design, human." I went, "Oh my God, that's that thing I heard about in Bali like years ago."
yeah.
Um, and that's what led me to you. And we'll get into that in a moment because I'm very happy to share what I've discovered with Gus. But isn't it funny how we're not always ready to hear,
Mm,
or we have to hear a message a few times. Um, I often notice that in coaching as well. Or the right people that you need in your life at a given time.
mm,
That you have to hear about it, digest it, consider it, And then there's other things that you're like, you're in it immediately before you even realize. Um, and it's funny, a friend of mine who I've sent to you as well, Gus, and I've been talking about human design for a while, but she heard it so differently until recently. And then she's like, oh, okay, now I
I
get
get it.
it.
It's a beautiful example of right timing, that
Divine
there
order.
needs to be a right timing for each of us, and just chasing something because someone said you should, or because everyone's into it, or there's got to be a right timing where you're ready for it or not.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Divine order, divine timing.
yeah,
How, I suppose, one of the questions, just a practical, and I feel like I want to get kind of the people who are rationalize it in their head. Why do I
yeah.
need something more than just astrology, or, and even would have little faith in astrology, maybe.
Mm.
What is it made up of, and how is it unique to anything else?
Yeah, so I mean, I respect everybody, and so I understand the reservations when it comes to putting in your birth details and then having something tell you something about you. And there's so many like kind of assessments, personality assessments out there, aren't there, in the world of all different sorts and types. And I have tried some of them, and this human design just really resonated with me. And I think, and what I see with the clients I have, it's because I can sit down with a stranger. I mean, like I did with you, although I recorded it for you initially, didn't I? So we weren't even sitting in person with each other. And I don't know them. So I'm literally just interpreting what I'm seeing. I'm intuiting from the form that maybe you'd have mentioned a few things in. And so many people say, I've never had a stranger tell me so much about myself, like, and sort of validated and spoke to aspects of myself that I didn't really know were part of me. And so when you have that feedback over and over and again, there's something to it. I feel it as a truth for me, right? And yet I never want to be prescriptive, because I think everyone needs to discern for themselves what feels good and what resonates. But ultimately, human design uses your birth details, and it is drawing on the Chinese I Ching, which is an ancient text, the Book of Change, that has 64 hexagrams in it. And the hexagrams really relate to 64 sort of human archetypal experiences, or archetypes, that we all know. And it's arranged on a clock in a wheel with the astrological signs and these 64 hexagrams. And based on your birth details and the algorithm, there are certain ones of those hexagrams, those archetypes, that are illuminated at the point you're born and 88 days before you're born. So there's two kind of readings that come together in a quantum: your actual date of birth, and then when you're in utero, still in your mother's womb. And so what happens is that a selection of those 64 archetypes get illuminated in your design, which tells you that you have these certain lessons, themes that are going to be playing out more strongly in your life. And through that, then the body graph comes together, which is a combination of, like I said, that definition, that openness, and it makes your type. So that's really it in a nutshell.
That's super.
Unless you've got any more questions about
No,
that.
no, no. Um, the great thing about Gus is every time I have a session with Gus, even though she might have told me in the last session, I'm only hearing it, like what we were saying earlier, I'm only hearing it for the first time. So I was like, I know I'm going to learn so much more this morning, getting into, because I know these are things that you would have described and told me in our first session, but it's the like, oh wow, there's so much to this.
Yeah,
And that's the great thing. I don't need to worry about that because you're holding all that information. I don't need to, it's
yeah.
surrendering to what comes up.
Mm.
Um, and then people are starting to hear these terms, in particular Instagram, are the types that there are. And I know there's obviously numbers associated. So what are the main four, if not five main types?
Yeah. So I always describe human design like a big onion,
Yeah,
because
exactly.
it's got so many layers to it.
Mhm.
And you can go really deep, much more than we could go in one session, but obviously we work for longer together, so we could peel some more of those layers, because part of it, there is information to share, right? But the key bit is letting that get like trickle into you at a cellular level, so that you're actually feeling it and knowing it from your own perspective. You're like, oh, I see that in myself. I see that pattern. And it's helping you actually kind of understand yourself in a more embodied, integrated way. and then move out into your life and take that experiment with you and play with it, because ultimately I can give you the outline of your chart, but you need to then take it. You've had your experiences in your life and only you know that, so you've got to take that and experiment with it. And so everyone that's really sort of into their human design, it's much more than just finding out your type and your profile. That's kind of like the very edges of it, and it's a start. But a lot of people don't resonate to that because there are only 5 types, and of course there's more than 5 types of us, right? We're infinitesimally different. So often just finding out a type can really not resonate with someone, and they're going to discard human design. Like, what does it mean? But when you start to get into a few more layers and into that more individuation of your design, then it really starts to come to life for me. Yeah. But interestingly, I'd like to know your experience, because I often find that when I speak to projectors, just knowing their type opens up a whole like inquiry, like, oh my goodness me, and I can see they're like going back through their life, and suddenly there's all these things are falling into place. Did you feel like that when you heard me?
Oh yeah, massively. And like I'm coming from a place where I've done an awful lot of self-exploring already.
Mm.
And the ego mind could get to the point of like, sure, I know who I am. And um something about the 40s, like you're going way deeper than what the world sees, and it's that true essence of yourself. And finding out I was a projector, and the 1-3 profile, a part of that, it just illuminated so much, but it has illuminated friendships,
Mm.
the depth of my friendships of other projectors, how it's like I have a real desire to set up a projector club.
Yeah,
Because it's like
that's
we
great.
just see and feel the world differently. And sometimes that difference is, I'll call it out, it's hard, it's hard,
Mm-hmm.
uh,
Mm-hmm.
how we see the world. So really gravitating to and finding out that people that I have deep resonance with are projectors. That's been funny. But also I've like much of my world has been generators and manifesting generators. Um, but one of the things, and I'm going to get Gus to show for those who are listening to the podcast, this will be on YouTube as well if you want to look at the profile itself, because Gus will share my profile in a moment. But um, finding out about even things like the invitation, right, in Projector, waiting for the invitation, the times that I didn't wait for an invitation and
Mm-hmm.
pushed through, burnout that within my system. And I knew that at a physical level, but I didn't understand that it came from something much deeper, that I am not built for a 9 to 5. I am not built for like really strict structured routines. I'm much more like free spirit, and now that self-employment has really suited me. But generators really struggle with my new setup, because it's like, are you not working now? My dad yesterday, you not working today? I'm like, no, I am. I am. I worked till 11 p.m. last night, Sunday night,
Mm-hmm.
because I don't have a set work
The
structure
Monday to
anymore.
Friday, 9 to 5,
Yeah,
right?
like
Yeah.
I started doing some work last night at midnight.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't, there's so much flexibility in knowing my type now that I don't judge myself for it, because I'm like, well, I'm just going to play to that strength now. I'm not gonna dishonor what I'm not. Like, um, so there's something around that. But it's also, I like what you said as well. It's not so prescriptive that I am this, so I must be that, and it's not a box. There's nothing worse in my life than being put in a box.
Mm-hmm.
That would be, and I think, and I love archetypes as well. I'm really starting to get really interested in archetypes. It's more they're just a gentle guideline for when there's uncertainty, or why am I feeling this different?
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Exactly.
uh, but it's your uniqueness within that frame of
Mm.
reference, I think, as a box versus a box.
Yeah.
I think that's been really gentle.
And I think that you will find human design online where it's kind of like cookie cutter, I'm going to call it. And that for me is not what it's about. You know, it's a process of understanding your uniqueness and individuating. And I find it really interesting because, there's a lot of talk, especially on Instagram, about, your uniqueness, your authenticity, speaking your truth, like being your true, being your unique self. But the reality of that, especially when you start to get into the depths of your design, can be quite confronting, because it's always going to mean that you're going to not be everybody's cup of tea. Always, you can't please and have everybody like who you are and your uniqueness. And so there's an element of courage that goes with that, but also an understanding that it's not about being everything to everyone. It's about coming back to yourself. And I think that's where I find that at that point the block comes for people, because it's like, oh, I have all these people in my life who think I'm like this, but actually I've just realized that that's an
No,
identity that's not even me. And so what happens when I change that? Who will I be? So there's that's where the tension point comes.
and isn't it, because a lot of my work, again, coming from the systemic stance, is around belonging.
Mm,
And we will do anything to belong. It's from
absolutely.
the moment we are born, to belong is the secret to survival.
Yeah.
So no matter what age we are, realizing that our identity in one group, let's say, is not who we want to be, or there is a part of us, you were saying courage, but it's like there is a part of us that's worried about our existence and will we survive,
Mm,
because that tribe doesn't see us who we should have been, or they want us
exactly.
to be. And that can be really confronting, because it could be
Oh
family,
my God, absolutely.
it could be childhood friends, it could be, and it's funny, you're hitting on all my themes at the moment, like I don't have a brand name called Beyond the Norm for nothing, but it's like, the uniqueness. I want to embrace it, but I don't want to be the weirdo in the room. Um, and feeling that a lot recently.
Mm,
Because I have much more vocal strength now to speak from my gut, from my heart, and I verbalize those things in rooms, and I do a lot of courses. And that, like, starting to love her and who I show up as now, as opposed to, oh my God, I feel like the weirdo in the room. Like I
yeah.
send those texts to my fellow projectors going, I'm the weirdo in the room again.
And yet by you doing that, you're giving everyone a permission slip to try that for
Yeah,
themselves. And that's the
yeah,
beauty, because we have, that I think we talked about Dr. Gabor Mate, and he talks about that attachment need, but also the authenticity drive. Like, there's two drives, and as we get
exactly.
older, they kind of almost are in a tension point with each other. That vital need to be authentic and the vital need to be attached,
So
and
true.
then they don't always work together. But what I've realized at this age that I am is that we're here to hold duality, we're here to hold tension. And every chart that I read, there are conflicts in the chart. They're sort of conundrums, we call them, where they seem to be polar opposites. And what that's made me realize is that we are here to be that, and to hold that, and to be multifaceted in completely like different tension points, so that we have the capacity to do that and hold that, because otherwise why would we be made like that, you
Yeah,
know
exactly. Yeah, no,
yeah.
it's so fascinating. I suppose this is probably the right time then to maybe perhaps show my chart, if that it's
Mm-hmm.
okay with you, Gus.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to bring it up there.
Yeah.
And we will talk about it, for those who are listening who won't see it as well.
Will you
This
allow
is,
me to share my screen?
oh yes,
Yes, thank you.
absolutely. Um, and hopefully it will allow me to allow you to do it.
With three
Um,
participants, you can do it.
oh yeah,
And then click on the far
there
right,
you
my
go.
name.
May you host.
That should be
That way.
okay.
Yeah, should do it. As we play around with the joys of Zoom on
Yeah,
live
okay,
and
here
on
we are.
recording.
Okay.
Super. So for those that are listening, Gus has just opened up my chart. Um, and also to add in, that I am, of the five styles, I am projector. And I'll allow Gus to kind of talk us through that, and yeah, what you see, and as you talked earlier about the colored centers and the
Yeah, so I'll
colored.
just do shall I just do a brief quick overview then?
Yes, please. That would be brilliant, Gus.
Okay,
Thank you.
so what you see in the center here is what we call the body graph. And so that is your unique body graph. And all the numbers that you see in the different shapes, which are called centers, are the gates, which relate to the hexagrams of the I Ching. They're called gates in human design. And if you are into the gene keys, which overlaps human design in some ways, they're called the gene keys, 64 in total, each of them representing, like we said, a human archetypal experience. So the column on the right on Norma's chart is the point at which you're born and which archetypes got illuminated at that point by the different planets. So we have her sun here in the gate 8 and her earth in the gate 14. And wherever you see a number down here, a gate down here, it'll be circled in her chart. We've got the 8 there and the 14 there. And so this side is, we call the design side, it's the body unconscious side. So this is the in utero reading around 88 days before Norma was born. And the same planets, what were they illuminating at that point? And so we get sometimes the same, similar, repeated, like the 18 and the 17, but sometimes different. So you get a collection of different archetypes that are illuminated that come through onto kind of into your body. So we say that they're more unconscious because well, they arrive before you're even born, they're given to you before you're even born, but they're on the body side. So the body will know this and have this kind of like a soul purpose, if you like. But sometimes from our personality and mind side, we might not really see those aspects of ourselves so clearly. Sometimes we're very in touch with them. So all of those gates come together in your chart and are circled. And wherever it's circled, we have what we call channels coming out, right? Some of those channels are colored in because Norma has those gates activated, and some of them are not, where she hasn't got them activated. And so from there, we get the colored in centers, the defined centers, and the white centers. So
That's great, Gus. I think
yeah.
it's even, I suppose, the most obvious thing that you see, that I suppose people who've been listening to my podcast at all or a while, and people that know me, that, and even you've gotten to know me, Gus, when you look at that, you're like, okay, these are the really obvious things that I hear and see in you. In particular, we talked about voice. If there were 3 or 4 of those that you could share, that
Yeah.
you see when you look at my chart, that would
So
help
the
people
first
believe
thing,
that
yeah,
it's like,
yeah.
oh yeah, no, that's true about Norma. Yeah.
So the first thing that tells me about Norma's type is the fact that this center here is white, undefined. This is the sacral center. And so of the 5 types, 2 types have it defined. And those 2 types actually make up 7 out of 10 people, roughly, in the world that you're going to meet. And 3 types have it undefined. So much more unusual to have it undefined. And that's what makes Norma a projector. She has an undefined sacral. So then I know that in terms of the way she manages her energy levels, she needs to be aware of her rest cycles, right? She's going to be more prone to burning out if she's not in connection with her body and her body's needs and the rest cycles. Now, the other thing that stood out from Norma's definition, which is where she's colored in, is that it's all around her throat, right? Her throat center is defined, and the 2 centers that are defined up below and above are connected directly to her throat. So what that's telling me is that firstly, she has a powerful voice that's here to be used. It's an influential voice, and she's going to have impact with her voice. Now, one of the things when I did Norma's recording, and what I always ask anyone with a defined throat is, are you comfortable being seen? Do you feel safe to express yourself? Because I find that's a lot of resistance that happens around defined throats is, God, is it okay to say this? Can I express myself as myself? So for Norma, she has this channel that connects her G center, which is all about her sense of self, her sense of identity, where she's going in life, to her throat. And so she's someone that's really here to express herself in a very unique way, only the way Norma can, and to find courage to do that, like we talked about earlier. So you'll be hearing a lot of uniqueness and originality coming through her actions and her voice through that channel and that energy. If she's living in that energy, of course, she may not be, but I know she is. But, when you learn about your definition, sometimes you're not actually embracing it. And then she's got her mind connected to her throat. This is also called the ajna, this center. So this is where we process information, we analyze, we conceptualize, we formulate, right? It's kind of an awareness center. And so the 1762, which is the channel that Norma has here to her throat, gives a completely different flavor to her voice. This is all about speaking her mind. And it's going to be in quite a logical way, quite detailed, quite precise, right? There may be thoughts and opinions that she has about something that when invited, she's going to express. And it's going to come through more of a logical expression, whereas this is much more of an individual expression. So yeah, for me straight away, I was like, the voice, what's she doing with her voice? Very, very important.
And the irony that we're now recording it on a podcast.
Yeah.
And it is that I think I wouldn't have known, there was times in my life where, you know, I I I pushed through in using my voice and it wasn't invited. So, the words didn't land versus places where I was invited to speak. What I said had profoundness for the people that were listening and for me as well, um, and the difference between being invited and not, as a projector, that when you do speak, then it is allowed. And I think because I've created this podcast and trying to branch out from that, even in YouTube and different things, that I'm now, instead of waiting for the invitation, creating this safe space for my voice, even if it's a small group of people that listen. It doesn't
Yeah.
matter there. It's the right place. Um, but I now know that there is resonance in my voice, and I think you had described it well a few years ago, or a few months ago rather, around this idea of when I speak, it can be clear and concise and pragmatic so people get it.
Mm-hmm.
And even though I'm deeply spiritual, that I try and keep it accessible or something around
Yeah.
that. It's like, yeah,
And
that's
that would
that's
really be that 1762 that can bring it out in a very precise, clear way and
ex-
organize, a storyline or for people to follow,
mm,
so that they can understand the context of it too, I imagine.
yeah.
Yeah. So when you talk about the invitation, people don't know that each type has what we call a strategy and an authority. And so the strategy is helping you figure out, okay, I've learned I'm this type. So how does this type move through the world in a way that is more aligned and magnetic? And so for projectors, it's all about waiting for the invitation for the big things in life, right? And the invitation doesn't need to be, Norma, would you like to? Although it can. It's also like Norma's done, she's created something. And anyone who decides to listen is inviting her to share what she wants to share, through that defined throat, And so each type has a strategy and each type has an authority. And the authority is kind of a part of your body graph that you can lean on to help you make decisions that are aligned with you. Often a lot of us make decisions with our heads, with our intellect, which is what we've mainly been trained to do through the systems, the education system and beyond. But actually, there's other parts of our body that really have this knowing of who we really are here to be and what we're meant to lean on to make decisions. So for Norma, her authority is her G center, right, which is her sense of self and identity and direction in life. And so, each authority has a way that you can connect with it. So for Norma, it's very much about being able to soundboard and speak out what she's thinking so that she can hear herself, hear the frequency of her voice, the tone, the truth in it or the not truth, in order to help her make decisions. Yeah.
And yeah, that really that's so true now, but I wouldn't have known that. Um, where I suppose this is just before we move away from the map, where this was really useful was in relation to others and how I respond. In particular in a new relationship, which I was last year. There was a great kind of understanding where there's kind of connections and things. If you could just talk to that for a moment, Gus, around, and I know you do it for parents in relation to their children, or in relation to your spouse, partner. Um, how is human design beneficial when it comes to you in relation to another.
Yeah, amazing. And I just want to say there's no like better chart, worse chart, or best partner chart, or we have what we
Star
need.
chart,
Yeah,
winner's
exactly.
chart.
We have what we need to work through the lessons and archetypes that we have, been born into this world with. So when it comes to relationships, whether that's you and your child or you and your partner, you can look at your body graphs side by side. And the key thing I look at first is, okay, what has one person got defined and the other person got open in terms of the centers? Because there's always going to be conditioning from the defined onto the undefined. And when I say conditioning, I don't want you to think about like something malevolent and manipulative. It just is. It's the energy. The defined areas are broadcasting and transmitting energy out. And the undefined centers, the mechanics are that they are absorbing energy around that theme. So it just happens anyway. And so depending on, which centers are defined, for example, just to pick a few, for Norma's chart, she has her root and sacral undefined. So if she was with someone, for example, that had a defined root and or sacral, she would need to be really, really careful of feeling the pressure to do and to rush and to hurry and to be in doing mode too much for her actual design. So that could really influence. A big influence is this solar plexus here, which is all about emotions. And so anyone with an undefined emotional center is going to be absorbing and picking up the emotions of the person that they're with. And depending on what their solar plexus is doing, that can either escalate really quickly because you're both picking up and distorting and throwing back out, or it could be that one person's sending a wave of emotional energy out and the other person's picking it up. And so what I find is that when I speak to people in relationships, partnerships, and or parent-child, is that there'll be things that are playing out that one side thinks is wrong. There's something wrong here. But actually, when you look at it with the chart side by side, you realize that it's just the dynamics of the mechanics playing out. And once there's that understanding, I find there's a lot of space for compassion and for understanding, which, I think is a beautiful place to start. Yeah. Does that answer?
Yeah, no, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
That was really, really lovely. I think we can take down my chart now and
Yeah.
it's gone into the last kind of final questions. Thank you for that. I think that will be really useful for people to kind of get a sense of it when they see it as a map, because I think you do it really beautifully, because it could be quite overwhelming if you went off and did this study on your own.
Mm.
And that's the beauty of having somebody who you formulate it again in a very accessible way, that it's not like, oh my God, all these numbers and I'm not numeric at all. So, if you saw that
Yeah. When you see the
on your
chart, you're like,
own,
oh
you're
my
like,
God.
ah, whereas you
Yeah.
make that really, really easy and accessible, and humanize it is probably the word. You do that
Mm-hmm.
really beautifully. Two questions. One of them is in relation to yourself. Once you discovered it, and I know you've spoken it openly, even on Instagram as well, about in relation to your children and the relationship, what has the profound impact of human design and Gene Keys has been on your life
Mm.
as of today? How has it helped you and served you?
Yeah. So human design came first for me. And immediately as I started to gather information about aspects of my chart, and I did that I'm a third line in my profile, which means I'm always going to be like trying this and then trying that, which is like my whole life, right? I need to do that in order to figure things out for myself. I can't have someone tell me, well, this is how it is. I have to go and just try it out. And maybe it
And
doesn't
I'm the
work
same
out.
as you. We're the
Right. Yeah.
same.
You're in
We're
the
the
body side,
same.
I'm in the mind side. Yeah. So naturally, when I look at my learning process of human design, it was third line. It was like, well, trying it out with my own experiment in my life, but also gathering information from many different sources and putting it together at different points in my learning journey. So the first things was the things that I'd held stories about, like I mentioned earlier, like, why can't you just follow one path? Why can't you be fixed in what you do? Why are you always making so many mistakes, or like down dead ends in your life, or what felt like dead ends? Aspects of my inner voice that was telling me there was something wrong about those parts of me. I've got various aspects of my chart. I'm a manifesting generator. I have this third line. I have an undefined G center, and all of those showed me that it was exactly, my design to be moving through life like that. And so that was really affirming. It's like, oh, wow. So that is actually me. How interesting. So now I can actually kind of like love those parts of me. I can actually embrace them and sort of play around with me even more. So it gave me permission to really lean into those parts of me rather than think that there was something a little bit like off, or, you know, I wished I could be like someone else. It could totally got rid of all of that immediately. And so I felt, I guess, validated in a really good way, like, oh, these are just parts of me, how interesting. Okay, so I can work with them. Very soon after I found design, I then dived into my kids' designs, and that just opened up a whole world of um actually very challenging stuff that came up that had me really have to unpack all the beliefs I held around what it meant to parent and educate your children. Once you see the uniqueness of your children, which sounds silly when I say it, because we know that all children, we are all unique, and yet there is a tendency to, you know, parenting 101, I call it. You kind of want to do it differently, but you end up doing it how you're expected to do it based on the culture you're in, right? And your familial upbringing and things like that. So yeah, it's allowed me to I guess see and unpick the patterns that, as I've gone through my process with my design, you know, more has been unraveled and brought forwards for me to see. So it's allowed me to have that confidence to go, oh, I see a pattern here. Okay, let me go in there and have a look at it. And it's given me that confidence to do that rather than feel like I'm just lost in a kind of swirling, you know, like which bits are me and which bits aren't me. I don't know really. It's given me more concrete something to work
Yeah, I
with. Does
can.
that make sense?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And Gus, for those that are listening, I was doing that with her
I'm
hands.
doing,
She's
what
like,
is it?
what it's that sense within your hands of like, what is this? But I, if
Yeah,
anything, my sense of when you describe it is a firm foundation, but it's a foundation that can move with you. It's
yeah.
not so fixed. And also I can imagine in relation to children. What ages are your children now? Just
They're
to,
now 16 and 13. And
yeah.
so I've been, I think, 5 years with design. So they were much younger. They were kind of just before and hitting puberty.
Mm.
And it's really has influenced the way that I support them in very subtle ways. And it's also allowed me to see their gifts, which is one of the things that I actually find the hardest with children. It's like, you know, they're unique, but actually the gifts are so nuanced sometimes. You know, when I learned about my own gift, it's like, wow, this is a gift. Let me just, you know, my son is in 52, which is all about learning how to pump the brakes in life and to tune into natural timing. And I'd always been a real stress ball my whole life till my 40s, and it made so much sense, but it's so kind of unglamorous sometimes. You're like, this is my gift, like the gift of restraint, it's called in the Gene Keys. I'm like, oh my God. But then you sit with it and you contemplate it, and it kind of like blossoms, and you really start to see the richness in it. And so it's also really helped me to start to walk with and understand my gifts. Yeah.
That's amazing. Thank you for sharing that because again, it humanizes the human design part of human design. Not to play on
Mm-hmm.
the words too much. And then I suppose being a witness to clients now
Mm-hmm.
and client work,
Mm-hmm.
um, without giving anything away, what's one of your favorite stories of your work impacting on someone? And I know I'm catching you off the hop there,
Oh my
but one of those
goodness.
anecdotal stories of it helping, and you can use
Well, like I
mine.
mentioned, I love receiving the feedback of like, how, you know, how can you know me so deeply from never having met me before? But I think the stories, I can't think of one story, but the general theme that I love hearing is, so part of my design, I've learned to know about my gifts, is being the witness and is being the listener, and then being able to hear and see the patterns that I can then point out. And so what I've found interesting is how profound that can be for someone, because I think I'm just doing something obvious because it comes more naturally to me. And yet when it's being received, you can see how deep it can go and how much it can suddenly shift a perspective or open a doorway that was maybe shut for someone, that just allows them to suddenly connect with themselves and see themselves in a very different way. and that they can take that with them beyond our reading or beyond our sessions, you know. So yeah, no, I can't think of a story on the spot, but yeah, that kind of experience has really also helped me see how powerful it is for anyone who's ready to explore it.
Super. What it's definitely helped me is around decisions. Um, clarity of, because I have an open center, is this decision mine or somebody else's? And also where it's helped me, because I have an open sacral center or G center, um, what is mine and what's theirs? And I need time away from everyone to digest, what am I feeling here? Is this really mine? Is this the other person's? Um, and that need, I suppose in the past I would have said I was running away, but actually it was retreating to discover what was mine versus somebody else's. And I think that has been really important. And my desire to, this permission to retreat,
Yeah.
to do that, to feel into what am I really feeling here and what's the other person feeling, because the lines get really blurred. And that's really clean in relation to coach work. It's relation to in everything else.
Yeah.
Um, Even basic things like I have a headache. Is this mine or is this somebody else's? Why is my tummy rumbling? I've just eaten. Is this mine? Is this somebody else's? Who am I with here? What's going on? What energy am I picking up on? And the more work I do in this, in the line of work I do, I'm becoming more and more intuitive, that I have to pick up on, yeah, what's mine, what's theirs.
Yeah, with all that openness of yours, right? Yeah.
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 And even being in a room this weekend on a retreat, um, that real desire to come back in and find out what was mine, because I know I was picking up on things that wasn't mine throughout the weekend. Probably part of the reason I've had a headache.
Yeah.
Because I can feel the other people that I'm with that are processing on a mental level so much of the stuff, probably my own as well. But really deciphering, I think that has been a real game changer in learning about my design. Um, Gus, and we're coming towards the end. How can people find you, and what is, I know you mentioned women and women in their 40s, any other clients that you really love working with, that you get to be you?
Yeah, I mean, I adore working with women in their 40s because I work a lot with perimenopause and menopause rites of passage, and it's been my own journey and, you know, another arm of like, I guess, work I do because I'm a manifesting generator. So there's more than one thing. But the two come beautifully together, which obviously I found through the process of being in both sides. So I'm on Instagram at Gus Grima, GusGrima. I've simplified everything, so that's really where I am and nowhere else. And yeah, that's really where you can find me and connect with me.
Super. And Gus has some lovely, I always love looking at your stories and updates because it's always something different than what I see elsewhere.
Yeah.
There's a uniqueness to that. Um, in the last podcast, I asked the previous guest to ask the next guest a question. And of course, I don't have that question, so I will send that question
Okay.
and add it in into this part of the podcast. But for you, just pausing for a moment, have you a question for my next guest, that you would like to ask them? And as of now, I have a few ideas of who it might be, but it doesn't matter. What question would you like to ask my next guest?
Well, I'll ask what's been top of mind for me and what I've been talking to a lot of clients about recently. It seems to be a theme, which is about how we value ourselves. You know, we talk about self-worth a lot, but another way to look at that is how are we valuing ourselves? What
Beautiful.
does that look like
Mm,
for you at the moment? I would ask.
that's fabulous. Thank you for that. And that'll get me thinking as well.
Mm.
Um, Anything else you'd like to add that you haven't got to say?
Gosh, I think I've said a lot. I would just, I think I've said it earlier, you know, if you feel drawn to something, you know, use your discernment. This is either for you or not for you, but I know that if you're into learning more about yourself, and that could come from a personal development angle, but in a very practical way, I find human design is a really good tool to add into your toolkit and to take as an experiment onwards. Yeah.
Thank you, Gus, and thank you for your wisdom, not just
You're
on
welcome.
this podcast, but your wisdom and guiding for me and our journey is not done yet. Gus
Yeah.
knows that.
It's been an
Um,
absolute pleasure. Thank
I
you for having
know,
me. Thank you.
not at all. I'm going to stop the recording now. Thanks, Gus.
Okay.
Thank you. As I find the recording, there you go. Oh, you're on. You're the host.
Oh,
I'll cut all this at the end, don't worry.
I will make you the host. There you are.
Thank you.
Change host.
I was like, why can't I stop this?